A new recycling scheme for 8 types of electrical and computer products takes effect. Authorities investigate last night's police shooting in Chunmun. And more than 100 people survived a plane crash in Mexico.
Hello, good evening. A brand new recycling scheme for computer products and 4 types of electrical appliances came into effect today. Sharon Tang has details on the implementation of the Producer Responsibility Scheme.
Stop creating more electronic waste.
Our actions somehow may affect the environment. The essence of the new PRS is to safeguard the environment. That the retailers, suppliers, and even the consumers should bear certain responsibility.
Starting today, suppliers will have to pay recycling levies for 8 types of appliances, such as televisions and computers. Levies will range from $15 to $165. Sellers must also provide consumers with recycling labels on the gadgets showing they're recyclable and receipts displaying the levies. But it remains unclear whether customers will have to pay more for the products. To perform a statutory removal service, sellers must contact a licensed recycler for their customers to remove the unwanted old gadgets to be replaced. Previously, a collector told the authorities that such service can be performed 3 days after the new gadget's transaction day at the earliest. Customers may have to pay extra if they wish to speed up the process.
I think that would be doable, and the concerned recyclers should have allowed reasonable logistic provisions to cater for their provisions.
Up until July, the Environmental Protection Department, or the EPD, has already received over 2,500 applications from sellers to register for the removal service. Vendors that fail to register with the EPD could face a maximum fine of $20,000. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
While the government is confident recyclers are able to deliver a speedy service to collect old appliances, retailers aren't so sure. Christy Leung spoke to some of them.
Old gadgets will be collected 3 days after a new purchase has been made. That's what the government's subvented recycler, Alba Integrated Waste Solutions Limited, promised in its service pledge. However, this retailer in Kowloon City, which opted for the service, isn't so sure the recycler can deliver.
I think it's not easy, although it's environmentally friendly, but the shop and the customer is difficult to find outable, because sometimes we call outable is call a lot of time, but they do not listen the phone.
Now the owner believes customers may have to wait at least a week.
It could be a lengthy wait, according to another retailer in Kwai Chung. The seller heard that customers may have to wait until mid-September before a recycler is free to provide the removal services in some areas. Such a trouble, said this lady. The way to reduce the waiting time is to pay an extra $150.
It is unfair for the customers to pay extra money to have the old machine picked up. The best way is to pick up the old machine when the consumer buy the new one, and the government or the contractor should do more to solve the logistic problems.
The legislator also expressed his concern that customers may choose to dump their old appliances at public refuse collection points if it takes too long for the gadgets to be removed from their homes. Christy Leung, TVB News.
In other local news, police arrested a man after he sought medical help for a suspected gunshot wound. The 24-year-old, who is in serious condition, is suspected of being linked to a police shooting in Chunmun last night. Police opened fire when 2 men allegedly resisted arrest and tried to run down an officer with their car. More details now from Caleb Long.
Police carried out an overnight search at Chunmun's Qinghoi Circuit. Officers were looking for bullet shells from last night's police shooting. It's all started with a police operation yesterday, which was set up after they received a report that vegetable trucks were being deliberately damaged in the area. 2 people drove to the site at around 9 p.m. One of them got out of the vehicle and allegedly smashed a truck's windshield with a brick. An acting superintendent later said officers dashed out to arrest the driver, but the man struggled with them and escaped to a car. Then he tried to run down the officers. The officer in front of the vehicle fired 2 shots at the car as the driver ignored warnings to stop. The police later discovered an abandoned vehicle at Shanghai Road in Yunlong with bullet holes and blood stain on it. Later in the night, a 24-year-old man went to Pokhoi Hospital to treat an alleged gun wound on his leg. He was later transferred to Tuen Mun Hospital for surgery. There, the male suspect was arrested for criminal damage, furious driving, and assaulting police officers. His partner is still on the run. The officer who opened fire suffered a few scratches and was also treated at Tuen Mun Hospital. He has now been discharged. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Meanwhile, the police launched a 6-month trial program using handheld video cameras to gather evidence against offending motorists. The offences targeted include illegal parking. The police will use the footage to identify the offending drivers. This morning, the police spotted around 10 traffic offences in the Western District within just 1 hour. Once the drivers paid their fines, the police will get rid of the related footage in accordance with privacy laws. Officers will be wearing uniforms when they are videotaping at public places, although their operations will not be announced beforehand in order to maximise deterrence.
The administration of US President Donald Trump reportedly wants to ramp up the stakes in the ongoing trade war with China. Bloomberg reported that Washington could propose a 25% levy on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports, up from its original plan of 10%. Beijing has again vowed to fight back to defend its lawful rights and interests. Jeff Tang reports.
Just 3 weeks ago, on July 10th, US President Donald Trump said he wants to impose a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports, pending the outcome of a public consultation this month. Trump said that was aimed at punishing Beijing for retaliating against the initial round of US tariffs on $34 billion of imported Chinese goods. But now, Bloomberg quoted 3 unnamed sources as saying the White House plans to significantly ramp up the proposed tariffs from 10 to 25%, covering thousands of Chinese products. Besides food, chemicals, steel and aluminium, a wide range of consumer goods including dog food, furniture, carpets, car tires, bicycles, baseball gloves and beauty products will also face higher duties. According to the report, the White House could announce the tougher proposal later today. Bloomberg also quoted sources as saying that representatives of US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He have been speaking in private in a bid to restart trade negotiations. Beijing, which vowed it would not back down from what it called Washington's bullying since the trade war began, said it will definitely fight back to defend its lawful rights and interests. The US Trade Representative's office had originally set a deadline for final public comments on the proposed 10% tariffs to be filed by August 30th, after public hearings from August 20th to 23rd. However, the office did not comment on the reported increase in tariffs or on whether there would be any change to the deadlines for the public consultation. It typically takes several weeks after the close of public consultation for the tariffs to be implemented. Meanwhile, Washington is also preparing to slap duties on an extra $16 billion in Chinese goods in the coming weeks as part of its initial round of hikes in levies. Trump has warned he may ultimately tax more than $500 billion worth of Chinese goods, which would cover virtually all Chinese imports into the United States. Jeff Tang, TVB News.
An Aeromexico jetliner taking off in a storm crash-landed in a field after it was hit by a strong gust of wind. More than 80 people were injured, but there were no fatalities. Alan Buckney reports.
The mid-sized aircraft heading from Durango to Mexico City was almost full, with 103 people on board. Authorities said there was a strong gust of wind just as the plane was lifting off, forcing the pilot to abort the takeoff. This crash survivor said there was a loud explosion. He didn't know if it was a lightning bolt or a mechanical problem. But he said it's too early to speculate on the cause of the crash, whether mechanical failure or human error were factors. This doctor treating survivors said most of the injuries were not that severe, but he said about 10 people are in serious condition, including the plane's captain. The State Health Department said 37 people were hospitalized. Alan Brooknia, TVB News.
Zimbabwe's ruling party has won a majority of the seats in parliament, but the results of the presidential ballot have yet to be announced. Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission announced that the ruling ZANU-PF party won 109 seats in the 210-seat House of Assembly. The opposition, MDF, had won 41 seats, with several dozen seats still to be determined. The Commission says it will announce the results of the presidential election only after all votes come in from across the country. President Emmerson Mnangagwa and opposition leader Nelson Chamisa were the leading candidates. Zimbabweans desperately hope Monday's peaceful vote will lift the economy after decades of stagnation under former President Robert Mugabe. And still ahead, the trial of Donald Trump's former campaign chairman on tax evasion and bank fraud charges gets underway. A parking garage collapse in Texas. And the government's updated guide for charitable fundraising activities.
Do you feel the world start moving and there's magic everywhere? Do you believe in magic? 'Cause it will set you free.
And a warm welcome back to TVB News. The trial of President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, on tax evasion and bank fraud charges got underway in a federal court in Virginia. Manafort's political consulting work in Ukraine is expected to take the spotlight later today on the second day of his trial. Prosecutors accused him of lying about his financial dealings and placing himself above the law in a bid to conceal his assets. Donald Trump's one-time campaign manager, Paul Manafort, is in the dock. He's charged with tax fraud, bank fraud and failing to report foreign bank accounts. He faces 18 counts and could get up to 30 years in jail if found guilty.
Right now, we're still at sort of an early phase of the trial, so you haven't begun cross-examinations that could be uncomfortable. Right now, it's sort of the easy stage where there's a degree of levity as you're picking strangers to basically decide your fate, so you're trying to put a good face on.
Manafort's attorneys have described their client as a talented consultant who made it to the pinnacle of US politics and on the global stage. They argued he did not willfully mislead or deceive US tax authorities, and that he was betrayed by his former business associate, Rick Gates. Internet giant Facebook says it has uncovered sophisticated efforts to use the social media platform to manipulate US politics. The company was careful not to link the effort directly to Russia or to the US midterm elections, which are now less than 100 days away. Its findings were limited to 32 apparently fake accounts on Facebook and its subsidiary Instagram, which the company removed because they were involved in coordinated and inauthentic behavior. After it became clear that Russia-linked actors used social media to try to influence the 2016 US election, Facebook has escalated countermeasures intended to prevent a repeat. It has cracked down on fake accounts and tried to slow the spread of fake news and misinformation through outside fact checkers. Staying in the United States, and a US federal judge has stopped the release of blueprints to make untraceable and undetectable 3D printed plastic guns. The company behind the plans, Texas-based Defense Distributed, had reached a settlement with the federal government in June, allowing it to make the plans for the guns available for download today. The restraining order from U.S. District Judge Robert Lasnik in Seattle puts that plan on hold for now. State attorneys in Washington state were delighted with the decision.
In the U.S. state of Texas, 2 sections of a multi-story parking garage in suburban Dallas collapsed 5 hours apart on Tuesday. A 40 by 40 foot section of the garage collapsed at 11:27 a.m., leaving 21 vehicles damaged, but no injuries. Hours later, an adjoining section also fell to the ground below. More cars were damaged, bringing the total to almost 30. Again, no injuries. The cause of the collapse is still under investigation.
Back locally now, 2 political groups today called on the government to reclaim land from the sea near Lantau Island. One of them even suggested that the chief executive seek Beijing's approval to carry out reclamation works in mainland waters to help solve Hong Kong's land shortage problem.
Through reclamation, Macau has expanded its land area 300%. So our suggestion is to request the chief executive to invite the central government to allow us to reclaim in mainland Chinese waters, preferably west of Lantau Island, so that long term we could relocate the container terminals to the new reclaimed land so that we can release the flat waterfront land at Kwai Chung.
It is, I think, erroneous to think in terms that reclamation necessarily would bring about environmentally unacceptable consequences. I think if you look at the third runway, you can see that the third runway involves 640 hectares, which have been built in 4 years, and not necessarily creating an environmentally disastrous situation.
3 government departments have jointly issued an updated best practices guide for charitable fundraising activities. Although charities are not obliged to comply, the guide may still help donors evaluate the organization's conduct and performances. Have you noticed more charities these days? In the 10 years from 2006, the number of tax-exempt charities doubled to over 8,900. It was under this backdrop the Director of Audit reviewed the government's monitoring of local fundraising activities, given a lack of legislation to control them. A year after the recommendations were made, the government today announced ways to protect donors' rights. Besides uploading organizations' audited accounts to the government site for the public's reference, there's also an updated guide on best practices. A 33-page English guide is now available online, stating ways donors can protect their rights, like asking for an official receipt for the amount donated or request to remain anonymous. It also highlights best fundraising methods and financial accountability issues. Charities are only encouraged to reference the guide and not obliged to comply. Those of you with questions on fundraising activities in public places can also call this dedicated hotline for inquiries or complaints. And that's the news.
Thanks for watching.